on July of 2008 when Apple released the App Store for the very first time.
What we call the App Store.
The YouVersion was one of the first 200 free apps. Being in Silicon Valley, there's a coined term of pivot, which really means something failed. That was really the story of YouVersion at the beginning. It was a failed idea of a website that we pivoted into the mobile space. We know that we're supposed to read the Bible, but when it's sitting in my house, we just really weren't engaging with it. And so we started exploring, what if it was with us? 15 years later, we're closing in on 800 million global devices in every country and territory, including North Korea and areas where the Bible's not even allowed.
Well, this is the season of Advent when we think about God wanting to be with us and in Jesus coming to be with us. And here's the truth about your life. You're going to do today anyway. We can do it with him or do it without him. And it's much better to do it with him. And I'm trying to learn that myself. So we're talking about how do we find God in this world, the real world? And that includes a world in our day that technologically is a different place than human beings have ever experienced before. So the guy I'm going to talk to today, some of you know, some of you will not. His name is Terry Storch. And if you've ever looked at the Bible on your cell phone, he is a primary leader of what has made that available to folks. So we'll get into that stuff a little bit. But Terry, you have also just been a good friend and an encourager of Become New. So it just means a ton to have you come on. Thank you.
John, thank you so much. I love this ministry. It blesses me every morning for about 11 to 13 minutes in my commute. Getting to know you and the team has just been a true gift. And so thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I just love it. Love it. Thank you.
Well, we're talking about finding God. And I thought I'd like to start with your own experience of how you found God in your life, kind of going from life that was mostly without him to life that was with him. I think it would be a huge gift for people to hear a bit of that. So if you don't mind, I'd love to have you talk about that.
Love to share that. I'll kind of condense some of it. John, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. It was a kind of a moral-based home. Sports were kind of our lives, and so I didn't have a foundation. Didn't have a foundation in God. My parents divorced when I was in middle school, about to go into high school. And that really set me on a really rough trajectory in life, making all of the wrong decisions, doing all of the wrong things, if you will, and found myself out of that and into early adulthood, and really making a lot of bad decisions. I woke up one day in my early 20s. A telecom entrepreneur, if you will, and a person that has lots of resource. I was financially doing really, really well and resourcing a really destructive life. That's not a real good combination and kind of where I found myself. And I had been drinking that night and decided to go out for a drive, and found myself in a parking lot calling out to God, this God that I didn't know, but just calling out to God of, I've tried everything and nothing's working. And I look up to the sign that was in the parking lot, and I happened to be, unbeknownst to me, in the parking lot of a church. And the church name was at the top, and the pastor enlisted of the service times. And I found a time on there that would work. And I said, man, I've tried everything but church. And so that was a Saturday night. And I woke up that next day and went to church for the very first time as an adult. And the experience for me is I was sitting in a room of probably 300 other people. And it was like the pastor was staring at me as he was walking, across. And I just heard the clear understanding of who Jesus was. And in that moment, I gave my life to Christ. And I was in a church that did this altar call. And so they asked you to come down if you gave your life to Christ, and I did, and so that is kind of how I met Jesus, and my life flipped in a 180 type of a way, and got very involved serving in that church, and that was kind of my journey to come to know who Jesus was, and the early part of my discipleship that started in children's ministry.
So let me ask you a little bit more about when you're sitting there in church and you hear this message and you hear about Jesus. What is it that made you think or know that God was speaking to you? There's a play by George Bernard Shaw, Joan of Arc, and Joe is this character who talked about hearing from God. And one of the characters in the play says, "Man, I wish God would speak to me like he speaks to you." And her response was, "He does, you just don't listen." And I know a lot of us want to hear from God, but we're not always sure how to listen or how to recognize or how to know. So if you just, think there'll be folks out there who are kind of wondering about that. We all hear words, we all hear content, we all hear ideas, we hear talk about religion. What was it as you were sitting there in that room after that weekend, that experience, about the tone or the content or your own inner emotion or so? What was it that made you think, "Oh, God is somehow revealing himself to me"?
Yeah. So getting myself back into that space, I entered that time broken. Mean so many parts of my life were just not working. Everything from a worldly state should have made me happy. It should have brought joy, and nothing was working. There was no joy, and I was just a broken young man, and seeking after how do I fix those problems. And I turned to drugs, I turned to alcohol, I turned to women, I turned to my job, and all of those left me still feeling empty and broken. And I had chased after all of those. And when I was sitting in that room, there was just a feeling that I had never felt before, a comfort in that time. And when I started to hear who Jesus was, and I started to understand that I believe language that was used, that God-shaped hole in my life, that we can try and fill that hole with everything else, but it won't become full without God entering into. I think somewhere in that language that clicked. It's like that's the thing I don't have. I don't have God in my life, and it just made sense. And it's like I've tried everything else, and I don't like the person I am, and I want to get out of this. And it seemed like that was the decision that needed to be made to get out of that brokenness and just quicksand, if you will, that my life was in.
It's so interesting because one of the themes that's come up in conversations in this series, Finding God in Your World, has been that word broken, and how each time in the Gospels when communion is talked about, the same language gets used, that the bread is taken, it's chosen, it's blessed, and then broken, and then given. And the brokenness is necessary. And I think about, in my life, I think my general tendency is to run from brokenness, to want to ignore it, deny it, not pay attention to it. But what you're saying really was experiencing the brokenness in such a deep way that it meant you're not in control. You are now accepting the fact that there's just brokenness in your life. And that was really the condition that set you up, prepared you to be able to hear from God. Absolutely.
And I may be jumping ahead in any way, but like the weird thing in my life, if you will, is that post that I kind of find myself always wanting to be unbroken and chasing non-brokenness, and finding myself in that loop, and which pulls me back to Paul of understanding our weakness, and again the connection here, and why I love this ministry so much is just the fellowship of the withered hand, and just recognizing that brokenness and living from that is just a big part in who I am today, and recognizing that, and not running from it, and just recognizing that there's strength in that weakness, and strength in that brokenness if we sit on that foundation of Jesus.
Yeah, so I just want to say a word to everybody listening right now to monitor your spirit and your life. And, if you're new to one of these conversations, we do talk about this little online community as the fellowship of the withered hand, from that story where there was a guy in a synagogue and his hand was this great shame and it was withered and he couldn't use it. And Jesus calls him to stretch it out. And it was the one thing he didn't want to do and he couldn't do. And yet that's where the strength and power of God flows, is when we're willing to be real about our weakness, and I can't, but God can. And this is a great time of the year. Advent season is often a time when we think we're supposed to be perfect. We think our families are supposed to be perfect. We think our experience of the holidays is supposed to be like a Hallmark commercial. And so we actually become more aware of our brokenness than ever. And what you're saying, Terry, I love, because it's like, oh, you know what? That brokenness may actually be the occasion for the greatest blessing you'll find. So you are, among other things, deeply involved in the world of technology. And I live in the middle of Silicon Valley. I was talking to somebody yesterday who's just launched a startup, super excited about it. Deeply invested in the world of technology. And that's a world where we tend to think to be strong, to be smart, to outwork the other guy, that it is the vehicle of human strength. And at the same time, for a lot of us, we have a hard time finding God in technology, probably because our lives feel so overwhelmed by information and the kind of polarization or mean-spiritedness that we find on some parts of social media. Facebook is said to be depressing if you spend too much time on it, and you're, looking at your insides versus other people's perfect vacations and so on. So I want to get to that. How do you find God in technology in a minute? But first, one way I know that it happens for folks a lot, if you've ever read the Bible on your phone, probably you've looked at something called the Bible App and YouVersion. And Terry's been one of the primary people that has been involved in that remarkable story. Tell us a little bit about it. Some folks may not know about it, and how it's touching people around the world, how God's using it, how it's been unfolding, because it's one of the amazing stories of our day.
Oh yeah, it's really unbelievable. I mean, so YouVersion now has been around for about 16 years. It originally started as a website that, being in Silicon Valley, there's a coined term of pivot, which really means something failed. So you need to do something else, and that was really the story of YouVersion at the beginning. It was a failed idea of a website that we pivoted into the mobile space. And this was pre-iPhone. This was pre-apps, if you will, and the real heart behind that, Bobby and I, who had been a part of it from the beginning, we just recognized the reality that we know that we're supposed to read the Bible, and that we're supposed to be engaging in it, but when it's sitting in my house and this book, we just really weren't engaging with it. And so we started exploring with what if it was with us? And that's what moved it back in the day to our Blackberries. And so we started as a mobile website on this thing called a Blackberry. For anyone on this, that's under 30 has no idea what that means. But it's a device that was kind of like an iPhone. And then Steve Jobs announced the iPhone, and then the apps came, and we were just humbly blessed that when we built the very first Bible app and submitted it to Apple, that on July of 2008, when Apple released the App Store for the very first time on the second iPhone, that YouVersion was one of the first 200 free apps that just made it. And so we've been on the iPhone and in the App Store since the very beginning in July of 2008, and that very first weekend, when we tallied up and Apple sent us the data, we had 83,000 people that downloaded that app on that first weekend, and those numbers just blew our mind. It's like, wow, 83,000, and so this little side project of a team became a full-time effort of like, man, God's in this, and we need to do more of it. And now 15 years later, and 83,000, installs now in our family of apps of everything that YouVersion is, we're closing in on 800 million, global devices in every country and territory, including, North Korea and areas where the Bible's not even allowed. We have people engaging in God's word everywhere, every day. And it's just humbling to see what he's done with it. And so it's a little part of the story.
Yeah, it's amazing to think across the centuries how people have devoted their lives, sometimes given their lives to try to make the Bible accessible in places where it was not. And now all of a sudden through technology, there it is. Any stories of somebody, are you ever able to hear from folks that are in a part of the world where having a Bible could be dangerous, when they tell you what that means?
We do. Those are some of the most just impactful stories of hearing from our community. I'm thinking of these two ladies that we got an email from, that were deeply persecuted in an area of the kind of the 1040 window, which is the very it's an area of the world where Christianity is basically illegal, and you'll be persecuted if not killed, for your faith in Jesus. And these two women had smuggled, if you will, the Bible app on their phone, and were in a prison, and were doing church, if you will, in their area. And it was their lifeline, and they got out, obviously to tell us that story, but just hearing how reading God's word in that moment in their language, which is also kind of the unique thing that we've been able to do with partnering with Bible societies and our partners all over, is that we have thousands of languages and Bibles that are available. And so they were able to read God's word in their heart language, and share it with others in their community. And it was just, it was what made them hold on and survive that moment. And we hear many stories like that, and many other more regular stories. And one that just is so near and dear to me, my father-in-law passed away nearly 10 years ago. Grew up a believer and had a deep love for God, but he struggled reading his Bible, and it was when the Bible app got onto his phone. I remember him celebrating with a phone call to me when, for the very first time, he had read the Bible cover to cover. And he was just weeping and just how much that meant to him, of something that he desired to do but wasn't able to do that until the Bible, was made available on his device and was with him everywhere that he went, and it just continued to transform his life. And so yeah, we hear so many powerful life change stories. It's pretty humbling.
So let's turn now to, Terry, your own personal daily life and looking for God in your world. And you are deeply versed in what does it mean to live in a world that is as shaped by technology as ours is. And a lot of people listening to this will say, man, I wake up in the morning and the first thing I do is pick up my cell phone and start doom scrolling and finding out what's going wrong in the world, or I get an email from work and I think I'm in trouble, or I'm overwhelmed by how much I have to do, or I look at somebody else's life and images and they seem to be so much happier and better off than I am. And I feel like I'm kind of tethered or chained to this. All kinds of studies about how many scores of times a day the average person looks at this phone, the loss of the capacity for empathy among younger people. How do you manage technology in your life? How do you find God in it? And how do you work on keeping it from becoming a drain to your spirit?
Oh, that's so good. I wish I had a silver bullet. I wish I had the answer. What I do today looks a lot different than I have been in the past. But I think some of the things that I've learned and disciplines that I've added into my life, with the technology draw and the constant need for attention, if you will. And so just some of the basics for me of how I'm finding God through that is simply by, I don't have a phone near me in the bedroom, and so I charge it in another room, and so I don't have access to that. When I wake up in the morning, I don't go to it first, and so I make my coffee. I start my day in a unique way, and then I then engage with my device, which is on do not disturb and is set, in a unique way that I start my day every time I can, which is a lot easier when I'm home and I'm not traveling. But I start my day, and I learned this. I can't remember who I heard it from, but they said have a space in your home or where you are, that in that space is where you spend your time with God. And so I have a chair in my office, in my home office, that is my devotional time. And so I find God with coffee. I love that in the morning. And then before I enter anything else, there's no email open, there's no social media open, there's nothing open. And that is when I start in prayer, and I engage in God in prayer, and I have a tool that helps me through that, because I'm not a great prayer. My mind goes everywhere, so I need something to help focus me. And then I enter into my time with Him and reading God's Word and getting that into my heart and into my spirit. And that is how I start my day. And so I experience that and try and find God in that mundane rhythm, if you will. And there are many times when I don't hear a thing. And
that will be a great comfort to a lot of people listening right now. And what do you do with those times when that happens and you're listening, you want to hear a word, you don't hear anything? How do you respond? What do you do? Do you feel like God messed up? Do you feel like you messed up? Have you learned how to be present in it?
Yeah, and so that's been a journey for me. I'm a guy that likes to get things done and accomplish it. And there were seasons in my life of where I just thought I'm doing something wrong, and I need to work harder, and I need to do this, and I'm messing something up. And I think over time, and the more gray and all of those things, is that what I've just learned is just to keep going. And there are going to be those days, there are going to be those weeks, there's going to be a month, of where I just may not be hearing, what I'm deeply wanting to hear from, but I've just developed the discipline and the habits to stick with it. And over time, and now the ability to kind of look back, and times when I didn't think that I was hearing anything from God. When you get a month or two or a year or even further, you can kind of look back and say, you know what, I actually was, and it may not have been in that moment. He was showing Himself in other ways, and so I stick with it, and I just keep showing up.
I love that. I don't know if I've ever thought about it this way before, but there's a difference between hearing from somebody and being with somebody. And it struck me as you were saying that if I insisted when I'm with Nancy that I had to hear from her, now she's very extroverted. She's the most extroverted person I know. So I pretty regularly do hear from her. But if I was simply sitting with her, if we were looking together at, something out the window, just simply being together, it would be kind of painful if I were to say to her, this doesn't count. It's not worth it being with you if I'm not hearing from you. So that thought of, it may well be when you're with another person, and maybe especially with God, that God will have very good reasons to make sure certain thoughts go through your mind if that's needed, and also to allow you just simply to be with him without it being useful for any particular reason, and to receive that rather than feel like I ought to be controlling it, or it's not worth it to be with God unless he gives me some special knowledge or something.
Yeah. A word that you said in there is a pivotal challenge for me, is control. At the innermost of who I am, and some personality things, I'm wired in a way that control is at the epicenter, and I want to control things. And again, back on that brokenness, it's like those are the areas I continue try and break, free from, of trying to control that and just be, and be still and be present and be with him. And I wish I could say that 30 some odd years into this journey that I get that right every day, but I don't. But it's that desire. It's the desire to be present and be with him and release that control. And it's in that where I find him. And it's interesting in this age of technology, that one of the areas that my wife and I love to escape to the mountains, in the summertime. And some's for the climate and just the beauty of that, but really at the core of it, it's in that space is when it's a lot easier for me to let go and release control, because I'm not in my own environment. I'm not in all of those things clamoring for my attention, and just the beauty and nature and being in the mountains. I'm not thinking about control, and I'm not thinking of that, and I just experience God in a different way, when I can release that control, and just enjoy being with him.
So everybody listening in today, the invitation is to let go of being in control. Part of the message of the Advent season is we are not in control. Nobody was in control of the incarnation. And your job is, when you and I get up in the morning, make space. Have a space for him. Make time, have a time for him. And then recognize, we don't try to be with one of these things. This gives us the illusion of control. I never have to be bored because I can use this to outsource my mind. But to be with a person and to be with God will often mean simply sitting and remembering I'm not the one in control. And then you can be with him any moment, this moment right here. Terry, thank you so much. This has been a huge gift.
Thank you so much. Honored to be with you.
Hey, if you like that video, go ahead and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any future episodes in this series, Finding God in Your World, where John will sit down with a different guest each episode, asking them that simple question: where are you finding God in your world? If you want more resources, head on over to becomenew.com/subscribe, where you can let us know if you'd like to receive the emails that go along with each video with extra content and information, or if you want to sign up for the text reminders whenever we drop a new video. Also, if you've got a prayer request, there's a group of us who meet each weekday, Monday through Friday, to pray for viewers just like yourself. So you can send us your prayer request to 855-888-0444, and we would love to pray for you. We'll catch you next time.